Welcome. This presentation is available for MCLE self-study credit. If you would like to receive credit, you must take 3 actions. First, click Show More text below on our YouTube page. The text will expand and show a link to download the handout materials. Once you finish watching this presentation, please click the quiz link to receive self-study credit. Once the quiz is successfully completed, you will receive a certificate via email within 72 hours. We hope you enjoy the presentation. Thank you. I would love to go forward and introduce our panelists who will be speaking this morning, starting with Judge Leslie Landau. Judge Landau joined ADR Services, Inc. in 2023 after 20 years of distinguished service as the judge of the Superior Court for the County of Contra Costa. Although a civil and appellate attorney by training and expertise, including serving as National Appellate Counsel for several automotive manufacturers and chairing the appellate group for Bingham McCutcheon, the last nearly 8 years of her tenure on the bench focused on juvenile and family law, including a term as supervising judge of family court, where she assisted the court in implementing technological advancements and responding to the COVID-19 crisis. Judge Landau has been recognized by the legal community for being hardworking, a deep legal thinker, a quick study, human, and fair. A collaborative colleague and exceptional writer, Judge Landau was often tapped by other judicial officers to work through complex legal issues and review and revise draft opinions. Now, as a full-time neutral, she's able to apply her analytical skills, creativity, ability to connect with people, and compelling writing skills to dispute resolution as a mediator, arbitrator, and private judge, where she helps people resolve disputes involving both complex and subtle legal issues and challenging personal matters. Thank you for joining us today, Your Honor.
Thank you.
Our other speaker this morning will be Judge Paul Suzuki. Judge Suzuki, a former judge of the Los Angeles Superior Court, brings a wealth of experience and expertise to the field of dispute resolution. In his final judicial assignment, Judge Suzuki served as the probate department, presiding over long cause probate trials, which were some of the court's most challenging and demanding long cause probate trials, lasting 5 or more days. Born and raised in Los Angeles, Judge Suzuki's personal history is interwoven with the city's diverse fabric. During World War II, his parents were incarcerated in a Japanese internment camp in Wyoming. Later in his life, Judge Suzuki embraced his role as a peacemaker, and during the Los Angeles civil unrest of 1992, Judge Suzuki worked tirelessly to organize forums between the Black Business Association and Asian Business Association, known as unity meetings, to improve relations between the two ethnic business communities. Since he's carried the lessons learned from the riots into his career as a judge and now as a neutral, becoming a lifelong advocate for resolution. He's well regarded for his intellect, his thorough preparation, and ability to grasp complex legal issues. His commitment to public service and unwavering respect for the law is unsurpassed, with many in the legal community commending his integrity, even temperament, and sound moral character. Thanks so much for joining us, Judge Suzuki.
Thank you, Katie.
With that, I will hand it over to the two of you. I know we have a little bit of feedback. I'll mute myself to avoid that, and we can get ourselves underway.
All right. Again, thank you, Katie. All right. Good morning, everyone. I'd like to say thank you for attending this morning seminar. As you know, this morning seminar is going to be on the elimination of bias. You know, we all live in California, and it's a great state, right? We got beaches, we got warm weather, we got vibrant cities. California is a great place to live. But what makes also California a great place to live is the great diversity that we have in this state. We have a huge mosaic of different types of people from different cultures, from different ethnicities, different races, different nationalities, different religions, LGBTQ populations. It all amounts to a beautiful place to live due to the variety of different people who are living all throughout this state. We can go to San Francisco, Sacramento, San Diego, Los Angeles, Inland Empire. We'll see all these different people speaking different languages, eating different things, having different cultural values in terms of having events. And it's such a colorful place to live. Now, during a Google search last night, I noticed that I put in the words, what is the most diverse state in the union? Well, Hawaii came out #1. They had a diversity index of 76. And guess what? Second most largest diverse state in the union was California, with a diversity index of 69.7%. Now, take into consideration the 2020 census. If we look at those figures, they're indicating that California has about 60% of people of color residing in this state. And we take in consideration the number of people in this state. You know, the #1 populated state in the nation is California. We have approximately 39 million people residing here. And if you take 60% of that population of the people of color, that's going to be approximately 23 million people out of 39 million people who reside here who are people of color. So we have a tremendous amount of diversity. So why does diversity matter in the court? I think there are many reasons. One judge talked about how the courts are looked at as temples of justice. And it's really important for the judges who are sitting on the bench to remember that. People have the expectation that this government will provide a place where things can be fair and have their disputes resolved in a just way. So it's really important to maintain that image or that perception that the courts are going to be the last place where one could go and obtain justice. Now, so how do we increase that feeling that people are going to feel comfortable coming to the court? What I would suggest that one way is to increase the diversity of the court. When people see diversity on the bench, they get a feeling of inequality begins to dissolve. Feeling of power imbalance begins to dissolve. Feeling of inclusion, not exclusion. Feeling of a level playing field. Feeling of fair play and justice. A feeling of confidence in our courts. And Judge Landau, would you like to add anything to that?
I do. I think that the immediate reaction that we all have is that we want the parties who come before our courts to feel like they see in the judiciary a reflection of the communities that they come from. But I wanted to point out a couple of other things that are important about why it's important to diversify the bench. Probably the largest number of people who come through our courts are not the parties, it's the jurors. We have thousands of jurors coming through our courts every single day. And those jurors are really the ambassadors for the justice system. And the jurors also see a diverse bench as a bench that reflects California and reflects well on our ability to give justice to everybody. And for example, in our court in Contra Costa County, we used to, and I assume they still do, have photographs of all of the judges up on the wall. The jurors are milling around and they got nothing to do while they're waiting for their case to be called, but they see a constellation of different people on that wall. And it gives a sense of confidence in the justice system to thousands of people who serve as jurors every year. Another factor is that there's a lot of data in the corporate world that diverse teams are more effective. Diverse teams focus more on facts. Diverse teams process facts more carefully. They are more innovative. And so having a diverse team of judges also makes the judges themselves better. If they are in a cohort with people of diverse backgrounds, they make better decisions for how to run the courts, and they have more input from each other on how to make the best decisions on the bench. And finally, and this is utterly self-serving, we are benefited here in Ingvar by diversity because judges are our pipeline. A lot of our neutrals come from the judiciary. And by having a more diverse bench, we can have a more diverse set of neutrals and better serve all of our communities. So that's why diversity is important. I want to now move into how we're doing. So Katie, can you change to the next slide? There we go. So we have some demographic data. There's not great data, but there's pretty good data. I'm going to talk about some of the data that reflects on the issue of gender in the courts. And then Judge Suzuki is going to move on to other issues, including ethnicity and diversity in LGBTQ populations. So let's move on to 2007. There was some data. There's the demographic data. We're going to ignore the Supreme Court because the denominator is so small with just 7 justices that a movement of 1 justice changes things too much. But looking at the trial courts and the courts of appeal, the gender balance in 2007 wasn't really terrific. There were fewer than 30% women on the trial court bench, a little more than 30% women on the Court of Appeal bench. And that was some 25 years after law schools had reached rough parity, and most law schools having 50% of women in their classes by the 1980s. So we weren't doing that great. So let's move on. The next set of data came from 2022. And on the Judicial Council website, we're doing better. In the trial court, we're approaching 40% women on the bench. And the Court of Appeal, we are over 40% of women on the bench. So that's really good progress. Now it's progress. It's not yet parity, but we're going in the right direction. So let's hear now from Judge Suzuki about issues of race and ethnicity and LGBTQ.
All right, thank you, Judge Landau. First of all, I agree with Judge Landau that the Supreme Court stats are looking pretty good, especially with the appointment of the newest appointment of Chief Justice Pat Godetto. So I'm not going to dive too much into the Supreme Court, as I think we are really doing an outstanding job in terms of diversity there. Now, the areas where I think we could take a look at, where we need a little bit more improvement, would be the Court of Appeal and the trial courts. And as we look at the diagram that's now placed on screen, the Court of Appeal, the first thing I should note, keeping in mind that the Supreme Court has 7 justices, but in the Court of Appeal, we have 106 Court of Appeal justices. So there's a lot of wiggle room there to take a look at and see what the composition of the Court of Appeals are. Now, if you look at the diagram, the gray part are the population of white justices who are sitting on the Court of Appeal. And the other parts, you can see the 2007 diagram is juxtaposed with the 2022 diagram. And we could see the change that happened over this period of 15 years. And starting from 2007, you can see the color portion, which is the green, lavender, dark blue, gray area. Those would be the people of color that were sitting on the bench in 2007. And I came on the bench in 2006. So this is 1 year after I came onto the bench. Now, if you add those folks or add those percentages, it comes up to approximately 18% of the Court of Appeal were people of color, whereas 81% were white justices. Now, thank God for progress. We're moving on to 15 years and a lot of things happen, a lot of good things happen. In 2022, we can see that color wheel on that chart expand very dramatically. So from 2007 to 2022, over those 15 years, the percentages are now close to 30% of the total bench. The justices who are sitting there are now people of color. Now, we still need a little more improvement, but we also have to acknowledge that there's been a lot of progress thanks to some folks who have contributed to this. Katie, I'd like to move on to the trial court slide. Now, looking at the trial court slide, We were talking about earlier 106 justices. In the trial court, we have 2,175. That's right, that's 2,175 bench officers sitting throughout the state. That's a huge number. Again, looking at the two pie charts, you have the 2007 and what happens 15 years later to 2022. Now, again, looking at the gray areas that would represent the judges or the trial court judges who are white. In 2007, we had 60, I believe close to 70% of the trial court was Caucasian. Again, this is about the time I came onto the bench in 2006, and we had approximately 30% in 2007 of the bench officers were people of color. And as you can see, one interesting thing, and looking at the 2007 statistic, there's that big top left-hand thing, which is, it looks dark blue. There was no response by 10% of the bench officers as to their declaration as to what backgrounds they were from. So I thought that was an interesting thing to note. But looking at 2022, 15 years later, we see again a phenomenal amount of progress. We now jump to about 30% of the trial court bench in 2007 to, I believe, we have now a total of approximately 37% of the bench being people of color. Now, also I would note that that this progress, I'll point out something about the Hispanic population. We could work on the Hispanic appointments a little bit more. Hispanics represent close to almost 40% of the population of the state of California. And if you look at 2022 stats, they're about 12%. So that's almost 1/3. If you look at the percentage, they have not come close to the number of people that constitute Hispanics in the state of California. Now, looking at, again, the progress from a positive point of view, we could, however, see the Hispanic population growing in terms of the trial court. As you all know, you're attorneys. The governor makes the appointments, right? So during the period from 2007 to 2022, we had 3 governors. During that period of time, we had Governor Schwarzenegger from 2003 to 2011. He appointed me, by the way. He, in the second half, he had appointed Sharon Major Lewis, who is also a former judge, but she at that time was the Judicial Appointments Secretary. And while I was on the bench, I noticed that through her efforts, she was an African American who was sensitive to diversity. The diversity on the bench started to increase, starting from, at least from that period of time when Schwarzenegger came onto the bench, the second portion. And then it continued on with Jerry Brown, who was the governor from 2011 to 2019. And of course, our current governor, Governor Gavin Newsom, from 2019 to the present. Now, both those governors did an extremely good job in terms of increasing the diversity to the court through their appointments. I think Governor Newsom is over 50% of his appointments are people of color and people who are also women. So he's doing a great job in terms of increasing that diversity. So I like to have my hats off to those 3 governors who are moving in that direction, and hopefully this trend will remain the same. Okay, I'd like to now move on to the LGBTQIA stats. Now, these stats are taken from the Judicial Council. We noted that the general population of the LGBTQIA plus population is 8%, or I'm sorry, 9% throughout the state. And their numbers with respect to attorneys are pretty similar. 9% of the population of attorneys, I'm sure some of you out there are part of that 9%, and we have an equal number of percentages of attorneys who reflect the general population. Likewise, judicial officers are almost 4.4% LGBTQIA plus. Katie, if you could turn to the next slide. Now, I thought this was an interesting information. This information was obtained from the U.S. Census Pulse Survey, and shows a trend. If you noticed, the age is at the bottom. And since I'm in the 60 plus category to the far right, in my category, they're indicating that 4.8% of the population in California were LGBTQIA plus. Now, for those who are my age or a little bit younger than me, we could see a generation gap real quickly by looking at this graph. Those who are the younger attorneys and those who are folks who are in college, if you have a child that you probably know this already, the 18 to 29 group, the survey is indicating that almost 20% of people in that category are identifying as LGBTQIA plus. So we put up the slide to show you some of the trends that are trending and what impact they might have on the legal community as well as the bench.
Okay, so now we want to move to the process of appointing judges and how do we get a more diverse bench? We are making progress. The statistics are good. We still have a ways to go. And we're going to be talking about two different things eventually. One of them is going to be the pipeline, how we increase the number of people coming into the pipeline who are women attorneys and attorneys of color and attorneys who are gender diverse. We want all of that. And we're going to be bringing people in the pipeline. We're also going to be talking about the judicial appointment and nomination process to talk about how bias may affect that and how we as people in the legal community can counter that. So we're going to start talking a little bit about implicit bias. Now, this is not your class on implicit bias. We're not going to talk about it a lot. You'll have a class later today that will. But it is an important thing to remember when we're talking about the judicial appointment process, which we'll get to in just a moment. In 2019, the legislature made legislative findings supporting AB 242, which was the bill that adopted additional training requirements for judges and lawyers on the issue of implicit bias. And the findings said that all persons possess implicit biases, that they're developed during the course of a lifetime, that people have implicit biases that disfavor African Americans in favor of Caucasians, and also negative biases towards members of other socially stigmatized groups such as Native Americans, immigrants, women, people with disabilities, Muslims, and people, members of the LGBTQ community. So these are the legislative findings. And I know that there are times when people feel a little defensive about it. I'm not a racist. I'm not racist. Well, implicit bias doesn't mean we're bad. It just means we're human. And probably implicit biases served us well when we first stepped out of the cave and we knew that saber-toothed tigers were bad. We had to make snap decisions, and we made judgments about things around us that help keep us safe. But now, implicit bias doesn't serve us so well when we're talking about other people in an interconnected world. But to eliminate it, we need to understand that these are implicit reactions. And so Judge Suzuki is going to talk a little bit more about it.
All right, thank you, Judge Landau. So I'd like to talk about blind spots on the topic of implicit bias. So there are things we know. I think for those in the audience, we know you're attorneys and you know the law, right? You know you could do a case and litigate or create a contract. So there are things we know. Second category are things we know we don't know. Okay, we know we're not doctors, right? And we're not going to do any surgeries anytime soon. Third category is the blind spot. Things we don't know that we don't know. This would fall into the category such as implicit bias. Implicit biases are very subconscious, as Judge Landau mentioned. There are things that we may not even be aware of decisions that we might do. And there are tons of biases out there. There's not only just bias against race, there's also biases for people who are overweight, or there's a beauty bias. For those who might be more good looking than others, they might have more of an opportunity. But all these biases are running on a sometimes very subconscious level. And some of the actions that we take as individuals are based upon those unknown blind spots that are operating. Now, unfortunately, some of those actions that we take could be not to or to the detriment of people who are getting discriminated against, whether that be a person of a different race, a different weight category, a different height, or whatever. But the point is that these blind spots could sometimes trip us up. And I would say that everybody has blind spots. There was a study done at Duke Law School, and that study had sent out a questionnaire to judges. And under that hypothetical questions that they were sending out to judges as to how they would rule, it was a criminal hypothetical. And so all the facts were the same, but they changed the race of the defendant. And surprisingly, the responses came back that if you were a Black defendant under those hypotheticals, you would end up with a higher sentence to prison, or you might end up with a higher bail as opposed to white defendants. Now, these are judges we're talking about. So that's not to say that judges are all prejudiced. I'm just pointing out that no matter who you are, we could have blind spots that are operating that we're not aware of. Now, I think one of the ways to, check those blind spots is I went to a UCLA mindful class, and they were talking about this concept called STOP, S-T-O-P. S stands for stop. T stands for take a breath. O means observe what you're thinking and what you're feeling. And P means to proceed. So using this handy tool in terms of handling implicit biases that we may not know about, one approach is to stop. Stop and think about and be mindful of what the situation is and whether or not there's something that's going on with your system of thinking, and think about, well, am I operating out of bias, or am I operating on an unbiased way? And then after thinking about it, then proceed. But I think the idea is to start getting the subconscious blind spots and raise it to the level of consciousness. And so you can make a decision whether or not or how you're operating.
And lest you think that this doesn't really happen, we talked about some experiences that we've had. Let me tell you 2 quick stories about my own experiences with unconscious bias. In the late 90s, early 2000s, I was the chair of the appellate group in a large firm. I had argued cases around the country. I was nominated to and elected to the California Academy of Appellate Lawyers. I knew how to argue a case. And in my firm, the head of litigation put together a program on appellate oral argument. And he invited us as a speaker, one of my colleagues, a lawyer who was a couple of years junior to me, terrific lawyer. He was going to speak on oral argument. And that was going to be to the entire litigation group. And a colleague of mine, a woman, said to this attorney, this head of the litigation group, hey, how come you invited this guy to teach this class? And he said, well, he's a great lawyer, and I think he'd do a really good job. And who else am I supposed to ask? And she said, how about Leslie Landau? And the guy just like hits his forehead. And, oh my God. Now, this is not somebody who I didn't know. I knew him well. He was a close colleague of mine. I did all of his appellate work. But when it came to thinking about the image of what an effective speaker on appellate argument would be, he didn't even see me. I was absolutely invisible. And I want to then fast forward. 2017. By this time, I'd been on the bench a dozen years. It's a long time forward, a whole generation of lawyers since then. And my husband and I were at we were in Barcelona, Spain, and we were waiting for an English language tour on the Spanish Civil War. There was another couple there also from the US, and we were chit-chatting, and he said to the guy says he was a lawyer and asked what we did. And there's always a moment when you're a judge when you either tell people and it's a conversation stopper or you don't. And I just decided I didn't want to go there. So I said, I work in the court. And the guy goes like this, smiles and goes like this, as if I'm a court reporter. And that I wasn't going to let pass. So not in a mean-spirited way, but I said to him, actually, no, I'm not a court reporter, I'm a judge. And again, his reaction was, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm so embarrassed. And again, it's not that he was a bad guy. It's just in his mind's eye, when he thought about what a person in the courtroom who's female looked like, he was not seeing the person wearing the robe. So these are the messages. These are the lessons that we get about implicit bias. And then the question is, what do we do to eliminate it? I don't know, Judge Suzuki, we're running a little short on time, but I don't know if you had a story you wanted to tell.
I do have a very short story, but I'll try to make it as quickly as possible. So it starts off when I first became an attorney in 1974. One of the top 10 things that I remember in my life is getting sworn in as an attorney. So, you know, I'm from LA County, right? And Department 1 is the presiding judge's courtroom. And in that courtroom, it's a huge courtroom. Think about any courtroom that you've been into and multiply it times 4. That courtroom can hold maybe 300 to 400 people. Anyway, so I'm going in there. I'm really excited about getting sworn in as an attorney. I couldn't believe I passed the bar exam, and here I am at the precipice of becoming a licensed attorney. And so I was very excited in Department 1. But one thought that occurred to me as I walked into the courtroom, if you've been in LA County Department 1, you'll see all these photographs. There must be about 45 to 50 presiding judge photographs that pepper the wall. They go all the way from the right side to the back side to the left side. And you look at all these photographs, and I remember them that I felt there was something that I felt a little uncomfortable about. And they were all white males. All 45 to 50, with the exception of maybe 1 or 2, about 45 or 50 white male presiding judges. But I was a happy camper at that point because I was getting sworn in. But, you know, it did occur to me as I was sitting down there waiting to get sworn in, the new world that I was going to be operating in. So fast forward 4 months later, I get a job at the Legal Aid Riverside County Legal Services. And I'm making I think my second or third court appearance in Riverside County. And it was a family law matter. It was getting a restraining order. You know, how difficult is it to get a expired restraining order, right? So I had all my declarations, right? I had all my paperwork, right? So I went in there, and the judge heard the ex parte on the bench. And but after the proceeding, he asked me to come back to his chambers. And I thought, wow, do judges do this or what? And I was a beginning attorney, so I didn't know what was going on. So, you know, I complied. I went back to the chambers, and so I thought, you know, I was going to get a reception of some type. But he looked at me real sternly, and he said, you know, are you an attorney? And I said, yeah, I'm pretty sure I am, Your Honor. And he asked for my bar card. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, is this something that normally happens? And And I should say I was probably either the second or third Asian in Riverside County back in 1975. So, I think that, to give him the benefit of the doubt, I don't know whether he was one of those, what we now call, because there wasn't a word for that at that time, a microaggression, where he was wasn't used to seeing an Asian face as an attorney, and he was calling me out, so to speak, and making me pull out my wallet and show my card. And the only other time I would do that is when I'm visiting as a private attorney. I was visiting inmates in prison, right? But so this guy's asking for my bar card, so I showed it to him. But I walked out of that courtroom feeling like that something was not right. And it made me feel a little less of a person, to be honest with you. Anyway, that's my short story. And I'm going to pass it back to you, Judge Landau, to talk about your next subject.
Okay, so just to be clear, we're talking about eliminating the bias in the process. We're not talking about being biased. We're not talking about putting the thumb on the scales for or against anybody. We're talking about a fair process. So let's talk about the judicial application process real quick. First thing you do, submit an application. A lot of work, takes a lot of time. Then you go into a drawer. At that point, maybe the judicial appointment secretary pulls you out of the drawer and sends your name on to the selection advisory committees. They used to be called the secret committees. They're not secret anymore. The identities of the people who vet are not necessarily secret. And also, and they provide input to the judicial appointment secretary. Then you go back into another. And then maybe the judicial appointment secretary pulls you out and sends you on to the Judicial Nominee Evaluation Commission, also known as the Jenny Commission. And what happens then is Jenny sends out questionnaires and provides official ratings of either exceptionally well qualified, qualified, or not qualified. And there's also bar organizations that do that as well. And then the judicial appointment secretary, you go into another drawer then. Then the judicial appointment secretary decides whether to interview you. And finally, the secretary may make a recommendation to the governor to make the appointment. Where do we fit into that? Well, obviously, in the submitting applications, the pipeline matters. We need to get people into the pipeline that are a good, quality, diverse group of people that reflect all of the lawyers in California who are qualified, great potential candidates. That's the pipeline issue. We're going to talk about that at the end. But the other place where we have a role is in step 4 there, where the Jenny Commission sends out questionnaires to us. That is where we have a role, and that's where we can really eliminate bias. That's where we have a place that we can go on this. So I want to talk a little bit about evaluations and the science of evaluations. So can we wait on that slide for just a second, Katie? There's a lot of data on evaluations for in the corporate setting. A lot of data that shows that very broad questions and subjective evaluations are fraught with the risk of bias. That's where our implicit bias really comes into play, or can. So that in groups, I'm going to call these the in groups and the out groups. You can define the groups however you want, but the in group is the dominant racial or gender group, and the out group is the not dominant one. In groups will be judged based on potential, out groups judged based on performance. So in the gender area, oh, he's going to crush it versus she's not ready. And then there's the halo or the horn effect. An in-group member who has a strength will have that globalized as a positive. The out-group member, if they have a weakness, it'll be generalized to a negative. There's the skill or luck bias, that the in-group person will be seen as skilled, the out-group person will be seen as lucky. And then there's just the stereotypes that a man, for example, who is ambitious and assertive will be seen as ambitious and assertive. A woman who's ambitious and assertive, well, we know the word people will use for that. And there's a lot of data on this, that this happens, and the more vague and general the questions, the greater the risk of implicit bias seeping into evaluations. So does that happen when we're doing judicial evaluations? That's an interesting question. We're not immune. We judges are not immune. That's what, and we lawyers are not immune. That's what the legislature of California has found. And so, and is there any data on judicial evaluations? Well, there is. There was an interesting study. Now let's take a look on the next slide. There was a study that was done in 2014 of a judging the judges survey that was done, I think, in Nevada. And lawyers were asked to evaluate the judges. And in those evaluations, they were anonymous. And even after controlling for a number of different indicators of judicial performance, including whether judges had been disciplined, including whether judges had been reversed, even after controlling for that, the gender and race meant women scored nearly 12 points lower out of 100 than men. And minority judges scored 21 points lower than white judges. And the conclusion of the study was that the sex and race disparities in the judging the judges survey was a thumb on the scales, systematically disadvantaging groups that have been traditionally underrepresented on the bench. So I think the reason we bring this up is that we are not immune. And so how can we personally then use this information to do our part to eliminate judicial bias in the evaluation process? And I think this goes back to Judge Suzuki's acronym. You got to stop. When you get these Jenny forms, everybody's gotten the Jenny forms. Let's pull up the Jenny form. Let's take a look at some of these questions. So here are two examples. Here are the judicial nominee evaluation form. One is professional reputation, includes honesty, integrity, community, respect. Very broad, very generic, not task specific. And the evaluation categories are outstanding, very good, satisfactory, below average, unsatisfactory, and unknown. Judicial temperament, again, includes impartiality, objectivity, judgment, collegiality. When we fill out these forms, don't be reflexive, be reflective, and take time. Don't fill out the form on your phone when you're waiting for a hearing to start or before you have a meeting when you don't have time, because then you don't have the time to think about what you're doing. And what we do when we fill this out has a profound effect, not only on the individual who we're evaluating, but also on the future of our judiciary. We want to make sure that when we're filling these out, we are taking into account what the best qualities would be for a judge, not our biases. So check our vision of what a judge looks or sounds like. Don't be that lawyer who thinks the only woman in a courtroom is a court reporter. Check your reaction to the applicant that you're evaluating for stereotypes. Is your reaction because somebody pressed a button? And if so, why did they press that button? Would you have the same reaction if they were a less diverse candidate? And keep in mind, too, that in filling out the Jenny forms, the Jenny Commission is looking for negatives. They're looking for things that are of concern. So if you say something negative, that will have a profound negative effect. Make sure it is well-based, not based on your stereotypes, but and ask yourself whether you would have the same reaction if it was a less diverse candidate. And try to reframe your look at this person before you fill out the form. Is the thing that pressed your button something that would make somebody an effective judge? Are you reacting to the fact that somebody had a quick reaction in a negotiation you had, and you're saying, well, that's emotional, and therefore that would make them a poor candidate and poor judicial temperament? Or is that something that means that they're decisive? Are you making an assumption about somebody being an angry Black woman or a self-effacing Asian which are stereotypes, if those same reactions from a non-diverse person would have a different effect on them. So ask yourself these questions before you fill out the forms. Be mindful about the risk of bias. And make sure that the evaluation form you're filling out based on real information and not on biases. So that's how we, as lawyers and judges too, can make a real difference in the evaluation process of nominees. And again, nobody's arguing that you should disregard things that are negatives. Nobody's arguing that you should elevate things to positives that aren't. What we're simply saying is that because we have a role in evaluating judicial nominees, make sure that we're making our judgments and framing our responses in ways that check for any biases that we may carry. So then there's the pipeline issue. And that's something that I think I'm going to turn over to Judge Suzuki to discuss.
All right, thank you, Judge Landau. So as indicated by the slide, what can we do to enhance the opportunities to diversify the bench? I think one tool that we can take a look at, and Katie, if you could go to the next slide, it would be there. Okay, so this slide is from the CalBar DEI, that's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Toolkit. And I thought this slide was very a good one to depict how judges eventually get picked in terms of how the numbers turn out the way they are. Now, looking at this slide, we call this, I would like to call it the pipeline slide. Looking at the 4 columns, the first column is the general population in the state of California. The second column is the number of law students broken down by race who are in law school currently. And the third column is the number of attorneys broken down by race as well. And then the fourth column is the column as to who the judges are. Now, going back to the first column, as indicated by that symbol on top of the column, there's a symbol of the state of California. That's the general population statistics. Now, I think that, again, this is out by the CalBar DEI toolkit. I think these figures might have changed just slightly, but not too much, but it's still a good slide to see the pipeline effect. So here we show that almost over 60% of the population would be people of color. And moving on to the law student slide, we can see that who is currently in our law schools. We have 51% of the folks in law school are Caucasian, 19% are the Latino population, 13% would be the Asian Pacific, and then 4% would be, I believe, multiracial, and I think African American is 5%. Again, I think these numbers might be slightly off a little bit. I think they have increased a little bit, but it still nevertheless is a good depiction of how we see the pipeline evolving. Now, the law students obviously feed into the next column, and that's the active attorneys in the state of California. That's you folks out there listening to this program. So based upon the CalBar DI toolkit slide, 66% of you are in the category of being Caucasian, and the other percentage are the people of color. Now, that's an important column because that's the column wherein judges are picked from. And so if you don't have the population to pick from, it's going to be a little bit more difficult to decide who gets to go onto the bench if you're a person of color. So if you look at the active attorneys and the judge slide column, they're pretty close to each other. But I think it's noteworthy to note that in that judges column, if you add up all the different colors on the top of that column, it comes out to about 37% of the bench are people of color. Keep in mind that that 37% comes from 60% of the population of the state of California. So right away, I think you could see some disparity in terms of who's presiding on the bench. But also, as indicated earlier, we are making progress. So, but I think in order to make a progress, and if we are interested in trying to increase the pipeline, we got to go back to column number 2. Column number 2 is where the students are. And I think in that category, there's a lot that I think you and I can do, and that we can start from elementary school to law school. There are a lot of opportunities out there for us to try to get involved in programs such as Law Day or Moot Court and so forth that could help assist the development of potential active attorneys. Now, I know that Judge Landau, you also have a good source of potential places where people can volunteer. I think that was placed in our resources thing towards the end of the thing. And okay, I was wondering if you could put that slide up, and that could help guide or help suggest where other people can go to help. And Judge Landau, would you like to speak to this?
Well, we put together, it's actually, I don't think it's even a slide. I think it's some materials that will be provided to the folks who are watching this program. But there are a lot of opportunities to work in courts and in schools, in mock trial competitions, and we've attached a bunch of websites that you can look to find opportunities, and also opportunities for yourself applying to the bench. California women lawyers have wonderful programs on So You Want to Be a Lawyer and So You Want to Be a Judge, and the programs are terrific, and it helps. There are also mentorship programs within the Court of Appeal that were spearheaded by the Judicial Council to help people become appellate justices if they're trial court judges. And there are mentoring programs in the bar to help you to put your application in and put your best foot forward. So we want the pipeline for the bench to be great. We want it to be everybody, because the better our applicants, the better our benches. And the better our bench, the better justice in California. So get involved. Start working in your schools. Be a docent and take kids through the high schools. Judge mock trial. In fact, Contra Costa County tonight is starting its annual mock trial competition, and they need one more judge tonight. So if there's anybody in Contra Costa who could do who can judge tonight, great. They need them, and I think they may need one for Thursday as well. I'll be judging tonight in the mock trial competition. Get involved. Get involved in finding out how to become a judge if you're interested in doing it. Network with people so that you can do that. Get involved encouraging youth to go to college, to go to law school, because that in the end is how we're going to have our very best bench.
Well, thank you, Judge Landau.
Sorry, I got us a little off track here. So sorry. We had you on the pipeline, Judge Suzuki. We went over some of these already. Oh, yes, we are done with our slides. My apologies. Let me pull them down for you here.
But let me just finish up. I just left the bench. And in my 20 years on the Contra Costa bench, I saw a sea change in the makeup of our bench. I think we are now more, or I can't keep saying we, they are more than 50% women, representing the entire population. And I could not have been prouder to be a member of a bench that was so diverse, that so well reflected the population of our state and so well served our community. And I feel very invested in wanting that to continue. So I encourage everyone out there to do what you can to bring people into the legal profession who are going to be great lawyers, to encourage people who have the skills to be great judges, to apply to be great judges, and then evaluate the people who come before you as judicial candidates in a way that is mindful of the risk of bias, eliminate the bias so we can have the best bench we possibly can.
I'd like to also comment, I came onto the bench in 2006. And when I left the bench about a year and a half ago, I have to say during those 15 years, it was a tremendous sea change in terms of diversity that was very observable. I met so many different people, so many different friendships that I developed on the bench. And so I do want to leave off with a note that we are doing better and things are improving. And also one thing I forgot to mention, as an attorney, you guys work in law firms, or women as well work in law firms. And there are a lot of opportunities to, in order to get to the point of your application and filling out things that you did, sometimes those opportunities are really important to be placed on your resume. And for those of you who are working in those law firms, it's really important to kind of stop and revisit, how do people get promoted to partnership, or who gets the best assignments? Because those people are going to be the people who are going to shine when the application goes in. So, the ability to increase this pipeline not only starts in the schools, but also starts in the law firms. And I would ask that you be mindful about that, because I think once the pool gets bigger and bigger, the selection of people of color as well as women will also increase. So that was just one passing thought I had. But otherwise, I do appreciate that everybody came to this program. And Judge Landau, would you like to add anything else to that?
No, I just want to thank you all, and I hope it was a useful program.
Mhm. Yes, thank you both so very much for your time and sharing your insights, and for all of the research that you've done, speaking with the Jenny Commission and such. We are right about at time here at 12:10, so I will let you go and enjoy your afternoons, but thank you so very much for your time in putting together this presentation and speaking to us today. Once again, Judge Suzuki and Judge Landau, thank you.
Thank you.
ADR Services, Inc. has been your unwavering partner in alternative dispute resolution. But as the world changed, so did we. From virtual and hybrid hearings to our ongoing on-demand CLE program, ADR Services, Inc. continues to keep resolution and legal education at the forefront, woman-owned and operated from the start. There is someone for every situation. We are ADR Services, Inc.